I'm en route from Swiftsure, from Victoria, headed to Port Townsend. I'm going to have a go at putting the Spinnaker up single-handed, and I'll kind of walk you through it. It's fun. First thing, I'm flying the jib right now. We're flying downwind, wind off our quarter, coming out of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. Gentle wind today. We probably got only about 10 knots here, so launching and installing a Spinnaker should be pretty straightforward, pretty drama-free. Let's take a look at how we're rigged here. So the first thing to notice about this boat, which is a Dufour 38, is it has a Spinnaker pole, and that pole is currently mounted on the rail. Now, a lot of boats this size would have them mounted on the mast, and it's actually easier to launch that way. For whatever reason, on this boat, when it was built, the mast track is just too short. We can't stow it on the mast, and so we've chosen instead to stow it on the rail, which actually works out fine, as we'll see. Another important thing to know about flying a symmetrical spinner, which is what we're going to fly today, is that you have two options with these poles. If it's a smaller boat, you do what's called an end-for-end jibe, and that would be where one end is attached to the mast, one end is attached to the guy of the Spinnaker, and when you need to jibe, you flip the pole around end for end, which is easy on a smaller boat, but that's a bit difficult and actually dangerous on a larger boat. So this boat is just a bit too big to fly a end-for-end jibe type of pole. So instead, we've got a pole that has two ends. It's got an end with jaws, or a jaw, for connecting to the guy. The guy runs through that jaw, and when you move from one tack to another, of course, or one jibe to another, you have to move that end of the pole from one guy to the other, from the active guide over to the lazy guy, as we'll see. The other end of the pole is different. It's not a jaw, it's actually a socket kind of affair that sits on a piston that's hanging off the mast. And that piston is right here. Now you'll notice I've marked on the mast with some white tape a location for that piston. What the location means is that this end of the pole is high enough so that the geometry allows us to do what's called a dip jibe, to bring the pole down under the forestay, back up on the other side to do a jibe without having to adjust the height of the pole. Now in this boat, it also happens to be that in most situations, that is also the best position for the pole to be while you're sailing. So you actually don't have to, unless you're really trying to tweak and tune, you really don't have to change the height of the pole as long as it's in that location right there, which vastly simplifies flying a Spinnaker, a symmetrical Spinnaker such as this one. Now here's the Spinnaker itself. You can see it's in its own bag. It's got two ends, or two corners, if you will. We've got the red corner, which goes on the port side, and we've got a black corner at the other end that will go on the starboard side. Now this Spinnaker in its launch bag is actually attached to the lifelines here, so it can't go anywhere. Opposite side from the pole. The problem here, small problem, is that we're going to be on a starboard tack when we launch this Spinnaker. We don't want to launch the Spinnaker on the windward side as it is now. It really needs to be launched from here, from the lee side. You'll see why I want to launch it, but basically the wind is going to try to pick that thing up and carry it whatever direction it wants. Now, this Spinnaker is in a sock, so we're not just going to have to launch the whole thing like a parachute and have it blow out, but nonetheless the wind is going to try to carry that sock to the other side, so we've got to make sure that that's set up properly. Let's talk about the various lines. Here on the shroud, this black line here, that's our Spinnaker halyard. That's what's going to carry the Spinnaker up to the top of the mast. That's its halyard. Over on the other side, got a green line. That's our topping lift, and that's the one that raises the pole to a desired angle. Here on the deck, this pink line, laid back a few times in a block. This is our downhaul, or foreguy as it's sometimes called. This keeps the pole under control if it's a bit windy and the pole is trying to lift because of the power exerted by the Spinnaker. We'll see how that works out in a few minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this camera in a place where I can just get some work done. Hopefully you can hear my narration, but you'll see how the Spinnaker gets launched single-handed. Okay, I think we're about ready. I probably spent more time actually mounting the camera onto something than it will take me to launch the Spinnaker, but we'll see. Things can always go wrong. So as I said earlier, the Spinnaker is currently on the windward side, which is not the correct side, and the pole is over on the leeward side, which is actually the wrong side for the pole. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is get the pole attached and over on the windward side, and then move the Spinnaker over to the leeward side. Now what I have done in advance already though is I've taken the two control lines for the Spinnaker, the guy and the sheet, on the starboard side and brought them around in front of the jib and made them available and ready with the port side guy and sheet ready to attach to the Spinnaker. Now if you're not familiar with a symmetrical Spinnaker, you got two control lines on either side. One is a guy, and that would be on the windward side, and that's going to hold the pole back and really give you the, think of it as the upwind side of the sail. And then the downward side is going to be the sheet. And in this boat, the sheets are lighter colored than the guys, so it's easier to kind of tell them apart. Now, so that means on both sides of the boats there's actually an extra line. So that's going to be on this side, there's going to be a lazy sheet that's not doing anything. On that side there's going to be a lazy guy that's not doing anything. And those come into play when you do a jibe, which we may or may not do here today. So it's important when you think about these lines that you think carefully about how they've been run back, what their positions are, that they're not running under each other in the wrong way. And also think when they're not being used, when it's a lazy sheet or a lazy guy, that it's not dragging in the water. So you just got to keep your eyes open, make sure you know what's going on. Here, for example, I've got the lazy sheet. Looks to me like it's actually a little bit in the water, so I'm going to bring it back a little bit. Make sure it's clear of the water. And it's attached to the secondary winch and ready to go. Similarly, over here on the leeward side, on the port side, that sheet is run back to the secondary winch, which you can't see right now. I'll show you that later. That's set up and ready to be our sheet when we launch. When we get the pole up, we get the Spinnaker properly attached. To make sure we get a good single-handed launch, we'll want to think carefully about how far back to bring the pole, how far back to have the sheets, so that when she launches, we're not doing a lot of scrambling back and forth. She launches with a reasonably good inflation, if you will, right? So I'm going to go through with it. You may or may not hear me, but I'm going to start by getting the pole in the right position. I'm going to move the Spinnaker bag over to the leeward side so it's ready to launch. I'll attach the halyard of the Spinnaker onto that black halyard line. And I want to make extra sure, by the way, when I attach the halyard, that the halyard is routed on the correct side of the jib. Super important. You don't want to launch on the leeward side and realize once you get it up there that the halyard is actually wrapped once around the jib, because then it becomes difficult to bring it down. And it just wears things out as well with chafe. So I'll take a look at that carefully. I'll look at the running of the lines. I'll just go through the steps carefully, in particular how I mount the topping lift to the pole, how I mount the foreguy, make sure the lines are all running in the right place when we're ready to launch. So I'm just going to get started on that right now. we get the sail or the spinnaker on the other side. Okay, I got my pole, got the spinnaker on the correct side. Just tighten up that top of the lift just a little bit. This is going to be our guide right here. The darker color with those two control lines. Snap that into the jaw. She's almost ready. Tighten that topping lift a little more. Okay. Now I'm going to connect and raise the spinnaker. All right, so at this point we've got both clews of the spinnaker attached to their respective control lines. Got the halyard connected, and you might be asking yourself, are we going to launch this with the jib still up? Now actually we could. We can launch the sock on the other side of that jib, make sure everything's nice and tidy, even launch the chute, then roll up the jib. Works fine. I'm not going to do that this time. It'll be easier to see what's going on, and I'm just more used to doing it with the jib rolled up. So that's the next step. Okay, so what happened there is that because the spinnaker halyard was behind the sail, as I rolled in the jib, it started to pull the spinnaker halyard in at risk of winding the spinnaker halyard in with the jib. So I took the Spinnaker halyard, brought it back a bit, secured it to a lifeline. No drama. Okay, so let's think this through again. We've got the guy's going to be over there, clipped in currently to the pole. Sheet's going to be over here. We're about 40 degrees off the wind, off downwind here. So it's off our quarter, which probably means the pole's going to come about halfway back. You sort of want to have the pole about perpendicular to the wind. This is a good rule of thumb. Also want the pole to be up. We can either bring the pole up now, or we could do that after we launch. I'm going to do it after we launch because there's some chance that we'll mess something up, a line will be in the wrong place. It'll just be easier to bring that pole back if it's still down. The disadvantage to having a pole down is you got to watch out. That pole can really hurt you. So you got to make sure that your head is not in its way. It can actually like bang you overboard. So we want to stay clear of that. It will never go past the jib unless we dip it down. So we're safe as long as we stay as much as possible to the leeward side of the jib when we're messing around up there. Then we'll bring it up. Blocking the sheet back, make sure it's ready to go on the secondary wind. Not too much slack. Now let's pull that sock up. It's already stuck on something. Let's check it out. Bound on the lifeline. We don't want to force anything without knowing why. Another thing I didn't mention is that this sock has control lines at the bottom for furling and unfurling. Those are super convenient. One thing you want to make sure is when you're launching a chute in the sock, keep those control lines somewhere secured. Now I've tied them off just in front of the mast because if those control lines get out of your grasp and go flying out, it'll be really hard to recover them and a pain in the butt to get the Spinnaker back down. It's already starting to inflate, you can see that. It means the sock is trying to get up all by itself. So again, I secured those control lines. Hopefully they'll stay. All right, so far so good. I'm going to check, make sure that we're all the way up. Okay, she's all the way up. Now, the guy is too far forward. I'm going to bring that forward so the pole is not going to be touching that roller furler. And we'll adjust things later. I'll pull the pole up just a little bit. A little more back in the guy if I can. Should be enough. Kind of choked down. Seems to me I got the sheet on the port side a little bit So it's kind of just from experience from your own boat, where things should happen, where they should be. I'm gonna pause here and see what I forgot. I always forget something. What I forgot was the downhaul. Downhaul, as I said, that keeps that pole under control when the wind gets up. Just clutch that off real quick. Clutched off, but left a little bit loose because we still want to bring that pole back. I think we're ready to launch. Bat out of hell. So let's do some steering. It looks pretty darn good. I'm going to bring the pole up a little bit. Got the auto helm set here, so should keep a course. We don't want to be too downwind because there's danger of a jibe. We don't want to be too far upwind because of the danger of a broach. There's a incipient broach. Bring it back gently. And right now I'm showing about 11.1 apparent wind. It's 6.8 knots over the ground. So we probably got somewhere around 15 knots of wind, which is a nice amount of wind to have when you're flying a chute like this. Much less, and the chute just gets a little squirrely, hard to manage. Anymore, well, it gets terribly hard to manage because of the boat. The rudder can't really grab enough when you have these incipient broaches. So she's a little bit of a handful right now, but I'm going to set the autopilot and trim things up a bit. First, I'm going to raise the pole a little bit more. Use a winch because she's a little tight. Yeah, it looks like I had the downhaul still tight, but in fact it was just the right spot, so I'm going to leave it there. A few things to notice. We got a lazy sheet over there, and I took care when I put the guy in to make sure the sheet runs up over the top of the pole. There's a little trigger button, and for me it just makes it so much easier if that sheet is oriented behind that little button. It may seem like a trivial thing, but if the sheet is hanging down, if it's just dangling, when we go to jibe and drop that pole out, it's going to land on top of that sheet. It's just a mess. So it's best if the sheet is on top. If it isn't on top, if we forgot, I'll spend as much time as necessary with a little cowboy lasso work and try to flip it up over that pole before I try any kind of a jibe. Now over on the port side on the lure, we have a lazy guy. It's not doing anything except trying to drag in the water. So we want to secure it in some way, but make sure it's easy to get to, because we'll need it up in the bow if we do a jibe. What I like to do is take that guy and tuck it just loosely under a forward cleat. And then it's just ready to use, ready to grab if I'm going to do a jibe. Let's go around the safe side of the boat. Right under there. So now she's available, she's secure, guy's not dragging in the water. And this is a nice ride.